Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review of the Snap-on CJ700 series stud, remover, and installer set, as well as dowel pin extractor. This would be the complete 17-piece set for the metric. They also had an imperial set or fractional set, which I think was like 23 or 25 pieces, and of course a big master set that included all like 40 pieces. These types of tools from Snap-on tend to be really disproportionately expensive. The master sets, like the 40 or 50 piece master sets that they make, they're more compact rather than these long ones. They stopped making these long ones, but the compact ones that are 50 and 60 pieces can be upwards of, on their website it was $1,000. It was pretty crazy. Even just the small sets like these, or the more compact ones, are like $350 and more. It's really surprising how much Snap-on charges for these. I bought these used. I did not pay retail for them. And to tell you the truth, unless you really need them or you're working on high-end cars or aircraft or something, I wouldn't recommend them just based on that retail price. But if you can get them for $100 to $200, then they're definitely well worth it, because it's hard to find stud removers and installers that are non-damaging like these are. And how these work is they come with a series of collets. Some of them are smooth like this, and those are the ones that you use to extract studs. There's a little trick. The issue with studs, especially if they're like in iron blocks or steel components, is they can become dowel pins, I should say, really stuck. So even using this in the collet system, cinch down, they can slip off, and you just put a little Loctite and let it dry on the dowel pin, and then these can extract them. And how these work is pretty simple. You do have these little collets, and the ones for studs are actually threaded. They're all threaded about 1 inch down, and it's pretty nice because they don't damage any threads. And so what you have is you have these long collets, and the newer ones work in a very similar fashion, but they're just much more compact. Some people like these, I've read online, because they seem to be more physically durable. You're never supposed to use an impact wrench with these. However, these long ones I've seen. I walked into a truck shop where I had a friend working once, and they were using an impact wrench on these specific long ones, and they say you're not supposed to do that, but they do work. You just happen to risk damaging the alignment pins. And we can see the evidence here. So when you put these in, they do have a little slot that aligns them, and that keeps the collet from wanting to rotate as you tighten down the top bolt. So you just put in the collet, and you just lightly thread in the bolt. You wouldn't want to have any pressure on the back of the collet at all. Otherwise, they're hard to thread. But they're a little funky to use, but man, they hold on perfectly. So you'd put that on, and then you just take this, and you just screw it onto the fastener, like so. And those little pins help you screw it on. And then you just go ahead and tighten down this back bolt, and that crushes the sleeve down in a little taper against the little taper that's on the front of the sleeve, or excuse me, the collet, and it locks it down super tight. And with the threaded stud style versus the dowel pins, because it's biting in the threads, I've never had an issue with them slipping. Either the stud unscrews or it breaks, which is something to be aware of, because this, and I think one of the reasons they went with a shorter style is because these long ones, it's pretty easy especially if you're using a wrench, to really put a lot of sideways force and cause it to want to bend or break the fastener. But they really work pretty well. There's not many tool manufacturers who make stud installers and extractors that are of this style, but they certainly work very well. Now, when you're using one of the collet pullers, these bolts in the back are threaded, and so you just take the slide hammer portion, which is actually a different part number, it's a CJ125, and you just put on the slide hammer. You would screw it into the back of that, and then you'd be able to slide hammer out your dowel pins. So this was just a quick overview of this more classic set. If you ever see one, then Snap-on still makes these, but they're just a more compact style. They are definitely very useful, and it's especially when you don't want to damage fasteners. And so they work really well for installing studs, because you can cinch them down as tight as you'd like to, and then release it, and then release it and unthread it, and you have a nicely set stud. They cover the most common sizes, but not huge or super small. This goes from 6 millimeters through 12 millimeter. and both dowel pins and studs in both fine thread and coarse thread. It would be specifically 6, 7, and 8 millimeter, 10, and then 12. One little oddity that I'll note is that the slide hammer, and of course the threaded holes in the back of these collets, is still a fractional thread or imperial, and so I thought that was maybe they shouldn't have done that on the metric set, because if you ever want to replace this, if it breaks or you just want to get a long bolt, which is something you can certainly do, you can get a very strong hex head or socket head cap screw, and you can get those that are 12 inches or longer through custom order. And you would think, well, you have the metric set, so you just order a metric coarse thread such as 10 millimeter by 1.5, but you would actually find that this is indeed a 3/8 thread, or 3/8 24. And so that's just a little oddity that the slide hammer is still a fractional thread. Other than that, there just isn't a ton of information about these kind of sets online, and so I just wanted to put a little review out there saying that these snap-ons definitely work great. And the older style is a bit longer, and I do appreciate that they made them shorter, and they actually discontinued this longer style, and there's actually some situations where the long ones would be a little bit nicer. However, the Achilles heel of them is that even though they're very deep, the collets are only drilled out about 1 inch or 1.25 inches. So you can't really use them on a really long threaded fastener or some type of specialty fastener that may be turned down. This would be example. This has turned down just a little bit on the tip, but I've seen fasteners that are special kind of lock pins where they're smooth way down and then the threads start further down, and you wouldn't be able to use these. Even though they're nice and long, they just didn't drill them deep enough. And that would have made them a little bit more universal and a little bit more useful in specialty situations. Otherwise, they are reliable, and one kind of nice aspect of these is that they're not like dies. They don't cut threads, but they have these slots, so when you push them into the collet, the slots can kind of push together and cinch on the bolt. That creates something known as a thread chaser, and it's very nice. So if you have a bolt that's a little dirty, has a couple little burrs on the thread, these snap-on collets are very hard steel, and you can just use them, but the collet itself, to screw onto the fastener, and little burrs that are on the threads and pieces of dirt that may be in there will end up getting pushed into these slots. So it's actually a really nice way to just run these over the end of a bolt just to clean up the threads and clean out grit. And so it adds another aspect of usefulness to them. And as far as using them to install dowel pins, they're actually pretty useful there. It turns out that the longer shank does help you hold it more firmly with your hand and be able to keep it a bit straighter when you're starting the dowel pin, and I've noticed that and have appreciated it. Anyway, that was just the end of a quick review of the Snap-on CJ700 series stud remover and installer set, as well as dowel pin remover and installer. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.